Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good to see all of you here. You've got your open minds ready to kind of engage with some ideas? Maybe. Post-coffee? How many of you have had coffee this morning? I'm curious. Yeah, that's why the industry's so big and growing. America's fueled on coffee. So it's a great, great gift. So a few introductory questions again, just to kind of get a test of the audience. I'm curious, how many of you are like the senior leader in your company? You don't report up except unless you're the president, CEO, or the top of the ladder. Let me see a raise of hands. Okay. How many of you report up? You've got somebody above you in the company that you report to. Okay. Is there anybody here who has nobody that answers to them in the company? You might say you have the least responsibility in the company. Let's put it that way. Anybody? Okay. So no, not managing anyone. Okay, that's kind of what I assumed. So you have significant influence kind of over at least a segment or division or department of your company in creating its culture. So our topic here today is thriving teams building a culture for success. Again, I'm going to introduce this with a bit of a personal story. For those of you that were here yesterday, I told a bit of my personal story through burnout, how it took me out of business leadership and pastoral leadership for 5 months, 5 years recovery coming back. Both of those organizations obviously had to carry on without me as their senior leader in place. The responsibility fell on the leadership teams that remained. And I've said multiple times that in many ways it was a reflection on me, their failures and their successes. I had something to do with it because had I set them up for success? Had I set them up for failure? Had I done my job? Or was it all about me? Well, both of the teams did fairly well. They struggled. When I came back, they said, "We'd love to have you here." Okay, it wasn't nice that you just disappeared. But we made it, thanks to the preparation work that you've done. One of the things I discovered, though, is that when a leader kind of exits in that sort of way without creating a clear pathway for the exit, all sorts of narratives begin to run through everybody's heads as to what has just happened. You see, we're all interpreters. And so no matter your position in your company, if there are multiple people in your company, everyone in your company is interpreting the actions of their direct managers and their senior leaders. They're telling stories about why things are happening the way they're happening. And one of the number one hallmarks of great leaders is they write that story. They communicate well enough so that they're telling the story that everybody then shares that story in the company. So the CEO, the president, the head of the department is the chief storyteller of every company. And if he doesn't tell the story well, everybody's going to be telling their own story. So this is true in businesses, nonprofit organizations, and churches. And when you have multiple stories begin to emerge, the stories begin to compete, and success has just gone out the door and the window. Churches fragment. Nonprofits fail to move toward their mission. Business take on losses, fail to be profitable, and become this hotbed of dissension and gossip and all sorts of corrosive cultural behaviors. Okay, I'm grateful to say that in both of my circumstances, the teams carried on telling a story reasonably well, but there was a significant recovery period for both of those teams after I returned. And I actually had, in both circumstances, had to get help to nurture, rebuild the trust between the leaders on my team and between me and the leaders. Because trust truly is a fairly fragile thing. And the fuel to success in any organization is always trust. And One of the best books is called The Speed of Trust. Anybody here read the book The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey? I think it's pretty sure it's Stephen Covey. Okay, just a couple of you. He says, when trust is low, everything takes longer and costs more. And of course, when trust is high, it's exactly the opposite. So I've been through a couple business transitions where there's been acquisitions or I've sold, that buy and sell. There's always this process called due diligence. And over dinner last night, we were talking about a couple of business deals that we were aware of. And there are small business deals that I personally know of. I'm talking about relatively small companies, $5 million and under, that due diligence literally took a year to 18 months to sort out all the stuff. And then I know of companies that are running 10, 20 billion dollars that got bought within 30 days because the company had such clarity and there was such a high level of trust between senior executives. It was all about trust. And attorneys exist because trust doesn't. That's why their documents are there to create such clarity that no misunderstandings can exist. Okay, and it costs a boatload of money to get that kind of clarity sometimes. But clarity, and so we're going to get to these three keys now. But let's start with the whole concept of teams. I'm assuming in this room, most of your businesses have multiple team members. However, there's this phenomena in startups. And so, most people here have, a team. I call a three-man team with hats. Everybody's wearing his individual hat. You have the executive hat, the operations hat, the sales hat, and sometimes, a fourth compliance hat. But some companies in the startup days, and even some larger companies, have one man teaming with hats. So I was started a coaching relationship recently with a company, and this company grew, in the last couple of years, 300%, and the founder is the president of the company. And early in my consultation with him, I asked him the question. I think he's got 28 employees now. I said, so in the course of any given week, how many of those 28 employees themselves come to you and ask you a question that only you can definitively answer? His daughter was in the room. Her eyebrows went up, and she looked at her dad, waited. And he said, 5. She looked at him and waited. He said, all of them. There's one man teaming with hats. Okay, and he's struggling to know which hat he's wearing, and so he has to be master of all. Okay, and if you start a business, a small business, particularly from the trades, you're going to be one man teaming with hats. You've got to do the sales because nothing happens until you sell something. Then you've got to produce the product, and you've got to get it to your customer. Oh, and you've got to keep the IRS and the banks happy by being sure your financials are legible to someone, can at least be interpreted to someone for tax purposes. And this is part of the pain of small startups. One man teaming with hats. Okay, so this talk is not excluding the one man who's teaming with hats, but it is geared toward the three-man team with hats. However, rules apply in all circumstances. So this is for both. I'm going to give you a few sources that I would deeply encourage you to immerse yourself in. And this is really, really easy reading. Patrick Lencioni is just one of my business heroes, partly because he's able to take very complex concepts, distill them down into fabulous fables. And so you're not reading a dry book, you're reading an engaging story. And if you're an executive in this room, this is one of the books you need to understand the 4 key concepts he talks about here. The 4 obsessions of an extraordinary executive. And I'm going to boil some of Patrick's work down today, give you my life experiences with it, give you some of my kind of personal assessment of his concepts, and hopefully you can go and strengthen the leadership teams that you're currently leading. He says that the 4 obsessions, and extraordinary executive that builds a culture of success, there are 4 things that he does intentionally, deliberately, and just like the pounding of an engine, he does it over and over and over and over and over. The number 1 thing is build and maintain a cohesive leadership team. I cannot overstate this. If you're the senior leadership in your company, your number 1 job is to build and maintain a cohesive leadership team. I was in a leadership role for quite a number of years. This is in one of my previous lives. And there was significant chaos and struggle inside the organization. Consultants in to help. The final assessment, after a long season of work and agony and travail and struggle, was the 4 leaders are in 4 corners of the room, and we have no idea how to get them together. Okay, is that organization going to be successful and healthy? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. In a consulting position recently to a nonprofit organization, they were going through a very difficult transition, and they had 1 member on the team. They had worked hard to gain consensus on a decision. They had 1 member on a team when it came down to the organizational vote, without disclosing his change of mind to his leadership team, voted against the proposal they had unanimously proposed to their organization. Okay, he had come across new information, changed his mind, voted against the proposal he supported with the leadership team. Will that organization thrive? Okay, and I'm telling you, a lot of people say, you got to give the guy a chance. I said, you can't give the guy a chance. He's got to leave the leadership team immediately, because that destroys trust. That's a betrayal of trust at the leadership team level. If he changed his mind, he is obligated to come back to that leadership team and say, new information, I'm struggling with the decision that I supported, and hash it back out. Incidentally, the guy was actually right about some of the new information. And he failed to serve the leadership team with that information. The number 1 obsession almost of a good executive is to build and maintain a healthy leadership team. And let me tell you, if you're in a rapid growth phase, this is incredibly difficult. I have a friend who grew a business over the course of about 7 years, from concept, a business feasibility study of about several hundred pages, got to review on my desk, from concept to $250 million in revenue with $1 billion valuation on the public markets in 7 years. One of those years, he turned his entire executive leadership team over twice. Chief Operations Officer, CFO, Chief Sales Officer. 2 different teams completely. Turned them, let them go, walked in and said, you guys are gone, hiring new staff. That's the kind of stuff you have to be committed to doing to build a healthy culture of success. And this is not for the faint of heart. It's not for the weak-kneed, though your knees go weak when you're in the middle of this kind of transition process. The other piece that I see continually emerging is you have leadership teams that form early in the business, and often what happens is the first employee kind of gets first dibs on moving up the ladder. And we give priority to experience rather than more objective criteria for their ability to fulfill their role. And if your company keeps growing, you can be 100% assured that some of your key employees who were A players in their role, you promote them, they actually become B players or C players because they have not become the people to excel in that space. Okay, and we're going to talk more about that as we move into this. But the toughest job, but it has to be the absolute number 1 priority for an effective executive to build a culture of success. He has to build and maintain a cohesive leadership team. And we're going to talk about some of those traits here in just a few moments. Second, that leader also has to create organizational clarity. This is not a one-time job. This happens over and over and over and over. And as soon as waters get muddied somewhere, they have to be able to sniff it out and create clarity. Extremely difficult again at times, especially when you're not sure. And one of the things I've personally come to persuasion in is, as I watch executives work, and with my own experience, is when they work to create clarity, they're often not 99% sure they're right. But they'll decide at about 60 to 65%. Okay, and if you can't confidently make decisions with a 60 to 65% level of confidence, the chaos, the confusion, the muddiness will just continue to expand, and it'll be always getting harder and harder and harder to create clarity. Okay, but these same executives, they make a call at 65% confidence. As soon as they see they're wrong, they'll say, I was wrong about that. Let's back up. We're going to do something different. They always bring clarity. Okay, this is critical. And I'm also going to just give a word to kind of conservative Anabaptist culture, because there's a lot of it represented here. It represents my subculture, American subculture. We are much more likely to go passive-aggressive in cultures of conflict. So what that means is we go sideways into conflict instead of straight in direct, clear communication. And it does not serve our organizations well. And leadership teams start taking wounds and then fail to build healthy, successful cultures. Somebody's got to change that. And as the CEO I work with currently, he'll say to me straight to my face, I'll never stab you in the back. If I think I need to, I'll stab you from the front. That's clarity. And one of his other mantras, to be unclear is to be unkind. Think about that one. To be unclear is to be unkind. I believe that with my whole heart. Not all kinds of creating clarity, not all forms of clarity are healthy. Okay, let's be candid about that. But if you see something clearly, you don't communicate clearly, you are actually being unkind, and particularly on a leadership team. Lencioni says the four things that extraordinary executives do is they over-communicate the organizational clarity. They don't just communicate organizational clarity, they over-communicate. And here's again, one of the things I've discovered on leadership teams. They're talking about this stuff all the time. But your delivery driver or the guy who's building trusses in your factory, they're not talking about this stuff all the time. And you actually have to say it 10 times before it even starts showing up on the radar. And you're already sick of talking about it. But if you're an effective executive, you've only begun. Same's true for marketing, by the way. How many marketing messages have to go out? The exact marketing message before somebody in the audience hears it for the first time? And you're sick of your jingle, so you toss it in for a new one, and it hasn't even started sticking yet. Okay, it's because you created it, birthed it out of your head, or with the team, and you're sick of it. By the time you get sick of it, you're just now starting. And this is true for organizational clarity. So you have to over-communicate it. That organizational clarity. And extraordinary executives do this all the time. And finally, they reinforce organizational clarity through human systems. Some of us are not good at systems. Some of us actually loathe systems. We feel trapped in systems. You're not going to grow a business, a healthy business, a successful business, with a thriving culture without very clear systems. And I'm going to give one little advocacy shot here. It took me years to figure this one out. And then I began to build systems, meeting rhythms. And every meeting that we had, executive meetings, leadership team meetings, one-on-one meetings with my direct reports, I began to develop rhythms by which those meetings took place so that every time we got together, everybody in the room knew exactly what the meeting rhythm was going to be. I've deployed that across churches, leadership teams, nonprofits. It has to be that way to be successful. People come in and those meetings become effective, fast-paced, open-hearted debates. You walk out of there with clarity, and everybody is pointed in the same direction, leaning the same way, going the same direction. Things happen. Okay, it's hard to create that. And even in my burnout, coming back out of it, what I realized is that my systems weren't all talking to each other. They were somewhat disconnected. And so EOS now, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, is one of my new best friends because they've taken the work of Patrick Lencioni, Jim Collins, and all these guys and are building it into a cohesive human management system that can work in any company, pretty much from small up to mid-sized companies, 500 employees, $250 million. That sort of scope, though some larger companies and some smaller ones use it. We've been using it now inside the Ulrich companies for 4 years. It's a phenomenal system. You can deploy it yourself. In your company, you can hire an implementer to do it. But it builds a cohesive system without you having to create it. And you get to deploy it in your own language. So that's a shortcut, honestly, to building these healthy systems. Maybe next year I'll get a chance to talk more about that. These are the 4 obsessions. So whether you are the senior executive in your company, so let me just say it this way, if you are the senior executive, this is your number 1 job. If you're the head of a department or division, this is probably your secondary job. But you have to lead like this to be effective. And the culture flows out of that, though there are other principles. So what do you have to have clarity about? These are the 6 questions for clarity. There probably could be others, but I'm going to give them to you. And this is the sample. If you want a good, honest assessment for your company, write these 6 questions down. Go have an all-hands meeting. Give them blank sheets of paper and ask them these questions and tell them to write their answers down without conversation. And then collect all the papers and see, you kind of get a litmus test for where your company is on clarity. Okay, so here are the questions. Why do we exist? If you asked a factory worker in your business today, why do we exist? What would they say? Or your dispatcher, or the person managing your books. Would they give the same answer that you hold as an executive? Okay, this is commonly called a business mission state or vision statement. What do we envision? Why do we exist? Okay, many companies have these. Nobody knows what they are. So either it's a bad vision statement, completely disconnected from the day-to-day activities, or it has not been, quote, over-communicated by the executive till everybody owns it. So successful, flourishing teams have great clarity around this question. Why do we exist? And this is true for churches, for nonprofits, and for businesses. They know why they exist. The next one should be obvious. The answer to it should be obvious. It's not usually. That question is, what do we do? And you've probably heard the story of a big cathedral being built, and someone comes along and asks the mason, what are you doing? Trying to make money. Asks another mason, what are you doing? Can't you see I'm laying brick, laying stone? Asks the third mason, all doing the same task. What are you doing? Building a cathedral. Ask the fourth one, what are you doing? Fulfilling my life's calling through great architecture. Same practice, a different vision for why they're doing what they're doing and actually what they're doing. And we talked about getting into the flow. This, what am I doing, at the highest point of purpose and vision and passion, has to be crystal clear for a leadership team to be thriving in its culture. Okay, somebody's got to create it. Somebody has to communicate it and over-communicate it and over-communicate it. And if it's not working and it doesn't represent what you're doing, they have to change it. Fix it. Because it won't serve you otherwise. Okay, third question. How do we behave? Often called core values. You know, you can't have all the core values equally. Every one of your employees and every one of your leadership team probably has some personal core values that govern and guide their decision-making processes day to day. Many of us don't know what they are until we go through a discovery process of deciding, well, what is it that actually makes me decide to spend $75 on a dinner instead of $10 on a dinner at McDonald's? Why do I do that? There's a value at play. Or you have the spat and the other person says, no, we're going to McDonald's. And you say, I'm not going to McDonald's. It's a core value discussion that's going on. Okay, and we have those core values that shape our decision-making process. And if you get them clear for yourself personally, you can create them as a leadership team for your business and communicate them down through the company, and then begin to hire people who can function inside those core values with gusto, with conviction, even if they're not perfectly aligned with their personal core values. But they can embrace them for the sake of the mission. And that's what creates a healthy, flourishing culture in a company. Great clarity on how we behave. Again, the company I'm in, one of our core values it's a negative one, and we've struggled with it for years, try to decide should we actually have it, but we have to. It's called no gossip. Gossip is one of the poisons of cultures. And gossip is very simply when I talk to someone else about a problem that they have no influence over and can't control or do anything about. And I refuse to talk to the person that has the problem or can resolve the problem. Okay, can you create a thriving culture like that if you don't talk to the people who have the issues? No, you've got to push the issue you got to stab the person in the front. Go straight to them, have the conversation. Is it easy? No. Is it the right thing to do? Yes. Will it pay huge dividends in the atmosphere of a culture and the ultimate performance of a company? Absolutely. And if somebody can't embrace that core value, we don't want them on the bus. Because no matter how good a salesperson they are, or how good they are at driving nails, they will destroy the culture of the bus. And culture wins over strategy every single day. Always has, always will. And yet it's considered by many to be a kind of soft science. Let me tell you, there's real hard data around this stuff. And if you're going to be an effective executive, you got to do the hard work. And this is one of them. How do we behave? And then you hire around those core values. You fire over those core values. You have hard conversations around those core values. You reward around those core values. You celebrate around those core values. And the culture begins to thrive and pulse in a healthy way. It's a place you love to go to work. You know how you behave around that place. And you love behaving that way. And you feel nurtured in your roles when people are behaving that way. You can't have more than 3, 4, or 5. Okay, and this is one of the mistakes I made. I don't know that it was a mistake. But before we joined the all rig companies, I had a little trifolder, and we had 3 big core values. And then inside each of the 3, we had 6 behaviors. Okay, so it kind of worked. And every day, every team in the company would recite one of the behaviors. We'd read it together. So every 18 days, you were through the list. but there were 3 core values. A little more complicated than some, but you've got to get clarity, got clear around it. You've got to address issues with it, have conversations with it, and use it to create this kind of clarity and thriving culture. How will we succeed? What does success look like for our company? And if you don't know, you'll never know when to quit. If you don't know what success looks like, you're not sure what to give priority to in your decision-making process. And let me tell you, success for a company is a very personal thing. You should never buy somebody else's definition of success for your company. You started your business for a specific reason. Identify that with great clarity. And I had some fascinating conversations with some of you folks yesterday about why you started your businesses. Okay, you need to tell that story to your employees so they can get on board with the ultimate purpose of your business. And it will define who your clients are, which ones are going to come rushing to you, and which employees are going to back away and say, I can't row with that guy. And the earlier you find that out, the better off you all are. So know your core values. Know how you behave there, but also what does success look like? And particularly on a leadership team, if you have one guy that says we're not successful till we reach $25 million in revenue, another one that says, well, we're not successful till we get to 20% net profit, another one says we're not successful until we're down to 3-day work weeks, you're going to be in trouble. Okay, you're going to be in trouble pretty quickly. So you got to define what success is, be sure you're on board with that target for success, and then get aligned and drive in that direction. But define it with great clarity so you can go after it. This one, what is most important right now? It can't be everything. It can't be sales and increasing. Let's not start down the list. It can't be everything. There has to be something, and usually one thing per leader, a primary thing for a leadership team that's most important right now. EOS defines that in a 90-day window, a quarter, and you redefine that every quarter. Goals that extend longer tend to fade. You have a goal for 90 days, that's a target you can move toward very deliberately and check it off as you achieve it. What is most important right now? And if everybody on the company, from the drivers to the factory workers, the salespeople, your marketing people, everybody knows what is most important right now, they can be attuned to it in their department, in their work, in their 8-hour slot. And you can move big ships quickly when you have great clarity about what the number one item of importance is right now. Okay, through COVID, that changed fast. Okay, and I'll never forget, after my $1 million loss, I got a little skittish about balance sheets. And then here just a couple years later, COVID and traffic at our stores dropped 50% overnight. And I said, okay, this is how I'm going out. And a friend said to me, well, at least you can blame it on COVID. I said, no, I can't. If I can't lead through this kind of crisis, I'm no leader at all. It's simply the circumstances I've been dealt. I have to figure out how to navigate this. And with the help of my CEO, we spent 2 days and we created an emergency plan. And then we created Plan B. And very simply, what we did is we took all the people in the company, put them all on a whiteboard. And we said, suppose our revenue falls by 50%. What does the team and what do the people look like for that company? We created the seats, and then we went out in what we called the parking lot where all the people stood, and we picked people that are currently on our team and put them in those seats. And we looked at them at each other and said, and if the numbers don't come back, that means all the rest of these people have to go. And we're going to do it as kindly, as graciously as we know how, But it's either that or all of us lose our jobs. That's not a fun conversation to have. Okay, and you don't publicize it. You don't even tell them you're doing it until afterwards, when they all have their jobs and you're hiring more people. Okay, then you say, hey, just so you know, what we did tell them was we spent 2 days and created an emergency plan. So we know exactly what we're going to do if things don't shift. And we're committed to giving as many of you jobs as possible. There is nobody here we want to lose. However, we're going to do the right thing for the company. And if we believe the right thing is that we step down as an executive because we don't know how to pull this off, that's what we're going to do. We created that kind of clarity. That's tough stuff, okay? And didn't sleep well for a few nights. Wake up at night thinking about the people in the parking lot versus my new org chart. And wondering what Fred's going to do if it come to that. Worried about Fred. Thinking about who I would recommend to him that he might find a job. You care about these people. But what's most important right now, given the circumstances you have in front of you? When lumber prices skyrocket by 400%, what becomes the most important thing? Varies by company, but you better know and have great clarity about it and take the actions that are necessary. Don't let life happen to you, okay? You are able to respond. Be responsible. It takes that kind of leader to create that kind of clarity in a company that builds strong, healthy cultures. And finally, who must do what? If everybody's responsible for everything, nobody's responsible for anything. Now, this was one area of weakness for me. Had a wonderful leadership team, but there was something about the way we reported KPIs, key performance indicators. There's something about the way we read our P&Ls during our financial reviews that I took full responsibility for everybody's failure to perform. And I didn't look at the sales guy and say, buddy, you told me this month we're going to sell XYZ. You came in 30% below that. What are you going to do about that? Are you bad at projecting? Do you have the wrong people? Is there something I ought to be providing for you I'm not providing? Or did you fall down on the job somewhere? My ops guys were depending on this number, and they didn't get it. Now our lead time's down, backlog's down. The guys are wondering where the next shed's coming from. What are you going to do about it? See, they're supposed to be big boys and girls too. And if you're going to grow a healthy leadership team in a healthy company, they need to know what they're responsible for, and the executive must hold them accountable with great clarity, great kindness. And if they consistently cannot perform to what the company needs, they're not the right person for that position. And you must be kind enough to put them somewhere that they can succeed. I had one particular employee. I put him in a position, a bit hesitantly, honestly, but on the recommendation of the guy he was replacing. He said, I want this guy to take my place as I leave the company for another position. I interviewed him and I said, let's do it. Most remarkable thing about that guy, he struggled for 2 years, but he grew so incredibly during those 2 years. After our merger, he was affirmed for the position, and he's now been promoted twice inside the company, moved, relocated to corporate headquarters, continues to grow. Got a text from him yesterday. Said, thanks, Steve, for all you did to help me grow as a leader. That's why I am where I am today. You've got to know, do the people have it in their bones? And then great leaders coach those people so they can be successful. And if they can't be successful, they're not going to be happy. If they're constantly underperforming, there's a certain niggling and draining that takes place. And you have to coach them to excellence where they're being successful or replace them. It's kindness. Had another guy senior guy with me in the company. As the company grew, he wasn't delivering. Very candid conversations. He stepped down one level in the organization, left the senior leadership team, said, I don't think I'm cut out for the job description that it's going to take to pull the results. And he had been an A player who'd become a B player, was bordering on a C because of the growth of the company. Hired a replacement. Incredible respect between those two men. Okay, the guy's still in the company now, 5 years later, 4 years later. And he's happy. The stress has gone down for him significantly. Now, he hasn't made more money like he thought he would, but he's in a position where he's succeeding. That's part of a healthy culture. And you've got to do the right thing for the employee so it's the right thing for the company. Okay, another thing that's a trait of all good, healthy leadership teams that create thriving cultures. There's complementarity on the leadership team. And various people use various terms to describe this complementarity. And just at the highest, simplest level, I use these three terms. The entrepreneur, this is kind of the risk taker, the person who has a vision that he's living and leading into. There is the integrator, the person who takes that general vision, puts the nuts and bolts on it, and sees to it that things happen. And then there's the compliance person. And without a good compliance person, your banker will hate you, and your tax accountant will hate you, and eventually the IRS will hate you. Or you'll hate the IRS at least, they don't care. You have to have all three of these general hats inside a leadership team. Okay, I'm clearly an entrepreneur. I love that space. I'm a moderately, reasonably good integrator, but it sucks the life out of me after a while. I am a horrible compliance person, but I have come to value compliance so much that if they're not good at what they're doing, I'll move them off the bus and get somebody that's good at it. Because they're the ones that save my skin. They're the ones that keep the P&L where it ought to be. They're the ones that make the banks happy. Okay, they're the ones that really ultimately deliver assurance to your customer service. That the phone gets answered, so they show up in a different space. The phone gets answered, the email is responded to, people are taken care of, that we're running true to our core values. Those kind of compliance rule follower people. Okay, and some of you guys hate them. But you've got to have that complementarity on a team in these three specific roles. So the visionary, particularly I like the term deductive. Some personality profiles use this culture index, for example. Deductive simply means the way a person is wired, they naturally see things in the future and work from the future back to create the pathway. And then about 60%, 55 to 60% of the human population, rather than being deductive, is inductive. And they start from where they are and say, what has happened prior to now, what's going on now, and what's my next thing? And their pathways tend to be like this in leadership. A deductive person looks into the future, envisions it, articulates it, and works his way back, tends to have a straighter shot toward the vision, which makes clarity a lot easier because they achieve that kind of clarity more naturally as a personality. Okay, you need some inductive people who remember the stupid stuff you did in the past and will remind you of it so you don't do it again. But your entrepreneur, your CEO, your president needs to be that kind of visionary, deductive, decisive person. If he's not or she's not, they need to know they're not naturally and have somebody help them create it. It doesn't mean you can't serve in the role, but you have to create that clarity and know how to live into it. So a good consultant, a good coach, another leadership team member, somebody else can help you create that to be sure that you have something that's workable going forward. The integrator typically then works in the operations, delivery, becomes the negotiator. They look at things from both sides. They haggle things, sort things. And when it comes to operations, fine-tuning processes. Critically important. And compliance, finance, systems and processes, and policy. Okay, and that stuff just made me shudder for years. Still does. If I have to spend more than 30 minutes a week in that space, I start getting the woolies and want to quit business. And one of the reasons I burned out was I was a day a week in that stuff. So you've got to know who you are, where your success lies, how you bring success, and then spend most of your time in that zone. And hire so that you have this kind of complementarity. So by default, we hire people like us. Because we think they're the best. Honestly. Okay, what you do is you recreate your problems. You have to develop a vision of complementarity, a great respect for complementarity. And the more intense your profile is around one of these, you actually have to hire people with more intense complementarity. So just a quick illustration. I've had a couple of executive assistants over the years, a couple that didn't work out. Probably my favorite executive assistant relationship, we actually did a very intentional culture index profile for me. I knew what mine was. And we said, here's the job that this person will have to fulfill. I just about said she because 80% of the time they're females. Females are wired more in that way to work in those kind of support roles. Most of, not all. Some guys are great at it. And yeah, so we created an ideal profile that would complement me. And this profile had to be fairly decisive and direct, or I would just plow over them. But had to have a very high attention to detail to keep me out of trouble. Okay, we had, I forget now, 185 applications. The first step was to take the profile, and if they weren't at least an 80% match, we just sent them a thank you, no thank you response. Did 3 interviews, hired 1, and let me tell you a story. Came to work, she'd been with me for a couple of months. We had our quick stand-up morning meeting. Anything you need from me today? Here's what I need from you. There's the stack, keep working on it in this priority. Did Joe call? She says, I've updated your calendar. I took this meeting out, added that one. You're gonna go to lunch with this guy today instead of Thursday. Thank you very much. I answered all the emails, no questions for emails. We had that conversation. I said, oh, by the way, I'm gonna leave at 4:30 today to fire up the smoker. Birthday party at the house tonight. She said, good. 4:29, she shadows my door. Steve, your lights are on. You're deep in work. You're leaving at 4:30, right? Right, yes. Yes, ma'am. I'm out. Thank you. Culture for success? Yes. Not just anybody's going to do that. They don't have the courage to walk in and look me in the eyes and tell me where to get on and where to get off. Some of us have to have that, or we're going to do stupid things. Fast. This complementarity question, here's a variety of natural traits. I'm just going to give you a few items. Various kinds of profiles, differing points of view, incredibly important. A range of ages, increasingly important because of the sharp, distinct differences between the various generations that we have. And if your company does not have, right now, at least 3 different generations on its leadership team, you need to have people in the company who will speak very clearly for their generational perspective. Or you're going to have funny hiring policies, funny vacation policies that are not going to attract the kind of people you need to have to grow a thriving company. You need to have that kind of input. Millennials are different from Gen Xers. They're different from Gen Zers, and distinctly different. It's part of the rapid pace of change. So find a way to get that kind of input on your leadership team. I personally think both genders bring a distinct perspective to leadership. And if you don't have both genders on a leadership team, find a way to get input. Because, believe me, women probably have more clout in the purchase of a shed than men do. Okay, and if your leadership team on your company doesn't reflect that, you're going to be out of sync with the products that women want and how they want them delivered to their homes. Okay, it might be your wife, but figure out how to get some of this input. Complementary. The question of faith, I could talk about this one for a whole workshop. Many conservative Christian small businesses are built to hire people of their same faith. Many times, not always, many times it'll actually impede the performance if they're all from the same culture, because they perpetuate each other's weaknesses. Sure, they build on each other's strengths, the same cultural strength, but often it requires a radically different culture to be a part of the team to bring a level of professionalism to the day-to-day operations. And everybody's got to put their big boy pants on and behave. And diverse cultures, differing faiths. And if this really matters to you, I've got a book to recommend, Christianity in the Marketplace. Phenomenal work on this. Diverse skills. We know this one. And finally, if you're really going to grow a company, you need to have people on the leadership team who have been where you're wanting to go. It's hard to get to be a $10, $20 million company from 3 if you don't have anybody who's run a $20 million company or been inside a $20 million company. A $20 million company is a very different company from a $3 million company. And if you have no one who's been there, you're going to really struggle to get there. You're going to hit glass ceiling after glass ceiling. It's not an easy, straight ride. And if the ride is easy and straight, there's a cliff coming up. Just telling you. Okay, and then finally, healthy, successful leadership teams prize candor. It's incredibly valuable, candor. And let me just give you the illustrations. Leaders pave the way here. The senior executive paves the way for this kind of candor, and he starts with what Patrick Lencioni calls vulnerability-based trust. The leader is vulnerable enough, doesn't overshare, vulnerable enough that he is known well by his team. Okay, and it's partly what I've been trying to model to you here the last 2 days. I've told you some pretty private stuff about my life that I think can actually serve you. I'm not here self-protectively, not that I haven't been at times. Good leaders model that vulnerability-based trust in places that they believe it will help you trust, enter this candor, high levels of trust, personal trust, so that when you go to battle, you've got each other. And you know so much about the other person. You know when they're coming up against their vulnerabilities. You step there for them. You protect them. You've got them. And they've got you. And if you're the leader at the front, you need to know they've got your back. I've been on leadership teams where the second guy did put a knife in my back. It was part of my exit. It was part of my crash. A big part of the story. That's why you have to deal with these issues on your leadership team with great clarity. So, here's a sample. Vulnerability-based trust. These are the kinds of things that happen in normal leadership conversations. These words are spoken. I'm sorry. I should not have said that to you. I don't know how to get this done. Can you help me? I'm not meeting my sales quota. To the operations guy, anything you have to say to me that could help me succeed to reach my goal. I'm lagging in getting this project done. Can you help me? That's an illustration of vulnerability-based trust. Let me be clear, Fred. If that practice continues, I'm going to have to ask you to leave your position. When you talk like that to me, it makes me feel like an idiot. My department is not meeting our KPIs. Do any of you have insights that might help me sort this out? Jane, you told us you'd have the month closed out The financials ready for this meeting. They're not here. What happened? In this kind of culture, the people who call out the elephant in the room, everybody knows about, nobody's talking about, and they say, listen, guys, we all know so-and-so is not performing in the company. What are we going to do about it? When people call out the elephants in the rooms, it's celebrated. The executive says, thank you for your courage in raising that issue. I know that's not an easy one to talk about. That's candor that's valued in a healthy culture. And then they're able to have healthy conflict around ideas. Not people, but ideas. And the healthiest, strongest, most dynamic leadership teams, I mean the energy in the room that's taking place when they're debating a strategy, it can get really, really intense. And let me tell you, this is fun stuff. When you've got a high level of trust and you can debate issues from the entrepreneur to the integrator to the compliance person, all haggling and fighting around the ideas. And then they come to a decision. Everybody has been heard. Maybe only one or two are completely happy with the decision, but they know they've been heard. They heard the objections to their concerns, and they make a decision, and everybody comes on board, and away we go. Because they know if it was the wrong decision, the executive's going to call it back and back up. But for now, we have thought it out. We've put all our concerns on the table. I'm not holding anything back. This, ladies and gentlemen, is really, really hard to achieve. But if you do, if you get there, you're going to smoke your competition day after day, year after year. And it's a fun place to go to work. A really fun place to go to work with a thriving culture. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, build a team. It's the best thing you can give to your employees. Thank you very much. And there's my 3 recommendations. Thank you.